So here we are back again, section 2, the early battles. I'm curious if you guys know where snowmen keep their money. Well, really, it's obvious in snowbanks. So there you have it. Laugh it off, but now we get back to U.S. history. So we're going to first start today by talking about the early battles of Section 2, and more importantly, kind of talking about the fall of the Philippines, why we can't really get to Japan, and the Battle of Midway. So first we're going to start by talking about the fall of the Philippines. So the Philippines at this time, they have a very close relationship with the United States, and a lot of it goes back to the Spanish-American War, the Treaty of Paris, where we were going to be granted kind of to be the protectorate of the Philippines. So what they do, because they know that we are so close, and when I say they, I'm talking about Japan, a few hours after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the Japanese start to attack American airfields in the Philippines. I mean, they knew that we were going to retaliate. They knew what they were doing was going to make us go to war. So because of that, they wanted to make it so we were not going to be able to attack them directly or quickly after the attacks on Pearl Harbor. So that's why they go after the Japanese, that's why they go after the American airfields. So really there can be no retaliation. Now, after they do this, they start to attack mainland Philippines, and the Americans and the Filipino forces are forced to retreat to the Bataan Peninsula. Now, this was something that we knew that they were possibly going to attack. It was short-lived with how quick the attack took place. But, really they were trying to go after us and become the major power in the Pacific. So after they attacked the American airfields, they had forces land, so they knew that we were not going to be able to really fight back. Now, when they retreated to the Bataan Peninsula, they were there. They had little to no supplies. People were getting sick. People were malnourished. They did not have clean drinking water. And the soldiers, they were forced to surrender. So with little supplies, life was horrible. They eventually had to surrender to the Japanese, and they went to a Japanese prison camp. Now, as it says on the PowerPoint, the soldiers were forced to travel almost 65 miles, so they were forced to walk the 65 miles. Again, they are already malnourished. They already don't have any clean drinking water, all sorts of negative things. And a lot of people were killed on this walk, and the Japanese really did not do anything to try to prevent that. And we'll talk more detail. We're going to watch the movie Unbroken. That'll show you kind of a little bit more about the structure of the Japanese prison camps and what was going to be going on with POWs at that time. But after the Bataan Death March, really it was known that the Philippines had fallen to Japan. So after that, we get to Doolittle's raid on Tokyo. So really, after the attacks on Pearl Harbor, and after we had that war declaration, FDR, he was searching for a way to raise American morale. And the way that he decides that morale should be raised is to attack the Japanese, kind of get some revenge. I guess a lot of people in my class have said in the past, or some retaliation. But we could not get to the area that we wanted to. And General Doolittle, who's in charge, he wants to bomb Tokyo. Really, that's the major city center. That's where most of the people live. He wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to kind of strike fear and make it so they would surrender. However, the big issue is we had the ability to take planes off, or planes could take off on these warships, but they aren't able to land on the warship. So not like you see today, especially if you watch the new Top Gun, they aren't able to land on the warships, but they can take off. So the big issue was, what are we going to do with these planes? Because we know we could get close enough to take off, but what are we going to do with the planes after the attack is going to take place? So what we were going to be able to do is we created a deal with the Chinese government that we were going to be able to land our planes in China. However, the big thing that comes along with this is that China had now essentially done a declaration of war against Japan. So it did take a little bit of time for that negotiation, for China to eventually allow us to land those planes there. However, really without that, we weren't going to be able to attack Tokyo. We weren't going to be able to really kind of raise morale that way. So anyway, so that's going to be what's going to be going on in Tokyo. Then we get to the last one, which is explaining the Battle of Midway. Now, The Battle of Midway gets a lot of recognition. There's a lot of films that are going to be made about it, but I don't think a lot of people really understand um, what we were trying to do here. So after the attack on Pearl Harbor, we now knew that Japan was going to be viewed as our enemy, and in any war, there's always going to be reconnaissance, or spying might be the better way to phrase it. But we are going to be listening into what Japan's next step is going to be. So the code breaking team, they had now learned of a plan to attack the Midway Island. And, I think a lot of people would say, like, all right, we know that we're going to get attacked. What we need to do is we need to just fortify that location and make it so it's like this impenetrable force or impenetrable island, and they aren't going to be successful. However, what our American military forces decided to do was, they did bring more soldiers, they did bring more planes. However, they did everything under disguise. They hid it as much as they humanly possibly could. And the Japanese, they're going to launch this attack on Midway on June 4th of 1942. But when they launch the attack, they have no idea that we are there and that we are waiting. So the Japanese, they launched their aircraft to go and attack Midway. However, about halfway through what they would consider to be like their bombing run, they realized that this is actually an ambush and that we were, hiding and disguising how easy it was for them to be able to go and attack Midway, and they end up getting attacked on an ambush. Now, they were going to do this in separate waves. However, after they had the ambush, the U.S. forces, we then kind of took the fight to the Japanese carriers. So as it says with the third bullet point, before a second attack could launch, the U.S. bombed all the Japanese carriers that were in that specific area, which, I think the reason they did that is pretty easy to understand. If we are going to be able to, have this war and be successful, we need to start to take the fight to other countries. So by us attacking their carriers, they are going to be forced to retreat all the other ones back to Japan, back to the Tokyo area, so that way they are going to be able to defend themselves. And really, this is pretty, we get involved in the war because of the event that takes place on December 7th. Now this Battle of Midway takes place June 4th, 1942, so about 6 months later. This is going to be viewed as like the turning point in the war in the Pacific. And even though it's going to be a long road for us to be able to try to get as close to mainland Japan and for us to go on that island hopping campaign, it was going to be quite significant because during the attack, the Japanese lost 4 carriers. Now, again, we don't have, especially the Japanese, they don't have a lot of aircraft carriers at this time. We know that their attacks had been launched through these carriers, and they were going to fly to complete the attack and then go back and kind of, go back into hiding a little bit. But overall, they lost 4 carriers, which is going to be significant because that's the heart of their Pacific fleet. And if you remember back to the first video, their productivity is not nearly as high as the United States. If you remember the statistic that I gave, we were 5 times more productive with our wartime board, with our war factories, than Japan was going to be. So yes, any country losing an aircraft carrier during the war is going to be significant, but it's especially significant because they are not going to be able to rebuild, and that's why it's going to be viewed as the turning point in the war. So anyways, we'll stop here today. Hopefully you got those 3 questions answered, and we will start with the next video tomorrow.